Okay, I think we're going to start now. So first I want to say hi everyone. Thank you for coming. This is our last event of the semester for the seminar series Latinos in STEM, a career path series. So we're very excited to have you all here today. So today, for those of you who are new to the event, I see that we probably have some new faces in the audience. So Latinos, Hispanics in STEM, a career path series is a new seminar series that we started this semester. It's a collaboration between LOGRAS, the Latino Organization of Graduate Students, the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering, and also the GoSTEM program at Georgia Tech. And today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Marvi Matos. She is a Director of Engineering and Design Practices at Boeing, the aerospace company. She received her BS in Chemical Engineering from the University of Puerto Rico and a PhD in Chemical Engineering from Carnegie Mellon. She's very passionate about STEM outreach and mentoring students, and we were excited to have her here with us today. So I will now pass it on to her and let her tell us today about her career path.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here and to share my career path and the opportunities I've had during this journey. And, you know, perhaps some of the challenges too, right? Everybody goes through challenges too. And those are sometimes even more fun. So I am going to try to share. Let's see, share the screen. Okay, so you should be seeing potentially like the infinite like page, right? In a view. And okay, so can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So before I start, I wanted to let you know that I invited one of my colleagues from work, Tiffany Yang, who's actually a graduate from Georgia Tech. And so she was interested in coming to the talk. And so thank you, Tiffany, for being here. And thank you for your support. My name is Marvi Matos Rodriguez. I'm originally from Puerto Rico. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and I studied my bachelor's degree at the University of Puerto Rico, as mentioned before, in chemical engineering. I'm actually originally from the mountain region or mountainous region in Puerto Rico, so from a very small town. And while in college, I actually became very interested in doing research. I always thought that, you know, the ability to invent and to find solutions was one of the biggest flaws, I guess, in engineering, right? And that's what made me passionate about engineering. And so once I discovered research and how I could, you know, invent in a lab and find solutions to problems that had not been solved before in a lab, I basically pursued that path. And so that led me to go into like trying different research experience for undergrads, REUs, and in the summer, where I learned about, okay, I can continue a PhD, which is sponsored basically, like it would be paid, I will be paid my tuition and a stipend, and I can just keep on studying. So I thought that was like an unbelievable deal that I just, you know, took. So I went to Carnegie Mellon to do my PhD in chemical engineering. At the same time, I finished a master's in colloids, polymers, and surfaces. So this was basically very much in line with the research that I did during those 5 years. And I guess as a part of my career path, right? You should never stop learning, right? And so many of the things and training that I've gotten, besides the technical training that you would need, say, in tools or things that you basically need to do your job better and to do your engineering work, I've also taken a lot of leadership training in program management training. So, for example, some of the formal trainings within the Boeing company and outside the Boeing company have been in program development and management, risk issues and opportunities management in training, the formal training for managers at Boeing, executive development training too, inside Boeing and also outside Boeing by a nonprofit actually focused on Latinos and also in basically the Asian community and development of leadership skills within our communities. And then accelerated and effective leadership training. So some of these trainings have been things that I pursue, and some of the trainings have been things that I've been selected to go and take as an opportunity, and some have been things that are mandatory. So, what is that work trajectory, and where did I start, and so on. I'm going to start this journey from what I would consider work, right? Which it started basically during my PhD, my graduate work. So I studied the mass transport, acceleration and control in polyacrylamide gels using embedded nanoparticles. So I had basically I polymerized my gels. I had charged nanoparticles inside. These gels are basically mostly water. And so you have an electrolyte, and then you have a mostly an aqueous environment. Because you have those particles, by the application of an electric field, you create two different phenomena, the electrophoresis and then electroosmosis. Electrophoresis is just the movement of flows, and the movement of entities that are charged under an electric field. Electroosmosis is the movement of flows. So it's convective flows that basically result from the movement of charged entities under electric fields. So I use that phenomena to basically control and accelerate the mass transport in these gels that were used for biosensing devices. And I did that for 5 years, basically. So you will learn as you go. You'll see how fast you will get into summarizing years of your life in a sentence, right? We do that in our resumes all the time. But when I give talks, it's just funny to me, how you can just distill it to, goodness, that's 5 years of my life in 2 sentences. So after the PhD, I actually wanted to continue in this area. My passion at the time was to try to take what I learned and apply it in a way in which I could study some of the, I guess, most challenging topics in tissue engineering. And at that time, I was fascinated by, studies and research in spinal cord injuries. And so the idea that I had was, well, maybe if I, instead of having particles, I actually embed basically cells, and in this case, neural stem cells, and I apply electric field, maybe I can control flow inside these gel structures in which I have placed my cells. And by controlling that flow, I can perhaps manipulate not just their proliferation, they're basically the creation of more cells, right? But their differentiation. So, turning a neural stem cell into basically a neuron versus an oligodendrocyte or any other type of cell. And so I did this for a year. I did this at the National Institute of Standards and Technology that was in Gaithersburg, Maryland. They actually do a lot of cutting edge research in a lot of different fields. And so the way I pursued that postdoctoral opportunity was by writing my own proposal on this topic. I submitted that proposal to the National Research Council, and they basically provided the funding so that I could become a fellow of the National Research Council. And then with that funding, I went to Nice to basically do my postdoc. And in academia, that's very normal, to actually write your work in a proposal format, right? So that you get money to do that fun work. I moved to Seattle because my wife was actually recruited at the University of Washington to start as a professor in the chemical engineering department. That was 2007, and something that I didn't tell you was that during my PhD, I had my first daughter. We had our first daughter, and during the postdoc, we had our second daughter. So it's like PhD kid, postdoc kid. So, the combination of the two, you could say, wow, how did you manage all of that work? I don't know, because I don't remember much of that period of time, right? So right away when you have a baby, it's not like you're a fully functioning human being, like you're more of a zombie, right? And I had to just manage, right? Like we wanted to have kids early on. We planned them. We wanted to continue living our life and not really wait until we were later, in our careers. And it worked fine. It worked perfectly well. So at the University of Washington, so once we moved here, it was 2007, and this is important for me to share this with you, because I know we're going through very tough times right now with the economy, and I think it's important for students to know this. In 2007, after my PhD, after the postdoc, we moved to Seattle, and I'm like, okay, so let's just get a job. And I'm thinking I'm going to get a job in tissue engineering because that's what I want to do, or in biotech, and it's going to be great. Well, I wasn't counting on the economy collapsing, right? And so I don't know if you guys remember, but by 2007, 2008, this is when the stock market collapsed based as a result of the real estate market collapsing. And everything froze, basically. So I was pretty much for a year looking for a job, and it was pretty tough. I won't deny it. It was actually really, really rough. And as a Puerto Rican myself, moving to Seattle in a time where the economy collapsed and where, like, we moved in September, so the fall is coming. It was actually pretty hard to adjust, right? I had two babies. I was potty training one of them. The other one was like a newly born. I was trying to find a job because I'm not one for staying at home. That is just not compatible with me. So I was trying to find a job, and the weather in Seattle was the weather in Seattle, right? So I share this because it's important that that career changes and so on happen not just because you have a master plan, right? They happen sometimes because that's what needs to happen, and that's what was available at the time. So I started working as a lecturer at the University of Washington, fully underpaid for sure. And I say this because I think it's also important to know that sometimes you make career plans and you don't get the job that you want, right away. And that's fine. You gotta just jump and try to make the best out of the opportunity. So I serve as a lecturer of the chemical engineering senior lab at the University of Washington, making less than the students I was graduating with a bachelor's degree. So I think it's important to know, like the things that you have to do, right, as you grow and as you go through your career. So I'm very, very open when it comes to sharing that kind of data. So as a lecturer, I transformed the lab. So I wasn't just teaching what I was supposed to teach. I actually transformed the lab. I wrote a proposal to the National Science Foundation, which basically moved the lab into an era of connected labs rather than independent lab experiments. We actually sort of like mimic chemical plants, which was more appropriate for chemical engineering students to experience. As a project manager in bioengineering, I moved to in my next role. This was in the year of 2010. I actually project manager diagnostic and tech integration type project that was funded by the Gates Foundation. In this project, basically, I had three techniques: principal component analysis, mass spectroscopy, and then basically plasma desorption of molecules from samples. And these were either blood samples or food samples. And the whole idea was to find that chemical signature so that you can create a diagnostic tool that you can calibrate. And the benefit of it was that it was a universal diagnostic tool. It wasn't like based on antibodies or on something or some specific chemistry. So while working on that, that was an exploratory, kind of like phase one type project. So I knew that when you're in what in academia, what's called soft money, right? You're always wondering and looking forward to what's going to happen next. So I actually started applying to jobs in industry. By 2010, the economy was better. Some companies actually started opening jobs and so on. One of them was the Boeing company. And they opened this role of basically a formulator of thin films that were basically being deposited using plasma-enhanced chemical vapor deposition. So, I use my background in plasma desorption to understand plasma activation and absorption, and then basically the creation of thin films, to then formulate materials that would basically prevent abrasion and erosion of window and transparencies in general, which just elongates the product life. So you don't have to change windows as fast, for example. I worked on that role for 2 years. Those 2 years were very productive when it comes to inventions. I told you I love inventions. Something I didn't say from the time I was at the University of Washington here was that at that time I was also working on the side as an independent consultant on intellectual property. And so I learned a lot about like inventions and patenting, and also competitive assessment and competitive assessment analysis from a market perspective. So I use that in that kind of skill, right, to then when I was working as a lead engineer and later on acting manager in chemical technologies, to focus a lot on like how to connect, what I was doing in the lab to inventions and later to patents. And so during those 2 years, those are basically the patents that I have, which are 7. I think that we ended up getting about 7 patents from those 2 years. And so, and as much as I like technology and technology development, I discovered that while I was in chemical technologies, I truly love the idea of leading teams. And I knew early on that, my mission, my personal mission was more than to create, technology. It was to serve as many people as possible. That's still the mission that drives me today. And so, take a step back, right, of this work trajectory. And as you move forward, think of what are the things that actually you're passionate about and what things inspire you. And then think, okay, how can I drive, my own vision and my career mission too, so that I can leave a legacy that is aligned with my values, my vision, my mission, what do I want to leave as a legacy? So I had this, realization early on, and I thought, my goal is to serve as many people as possible. And that mission of mine actually has driven me to change jobs, to change companies, to like move backwards. I mean, it's quite foundational, right? In terms of how I make the decisions. So in order to grow within the Boeing company, one of the things that I learned also was that I needed to really understand better the products that we make. And so rather than say growing into just any management job, I said, okay, I probably need to go into manufacturing, and I probably need to go into product development. I probably need to go. So there's so many things that I have to learn that are not research, right? Are not materials research. And all of those things have propelled me later on. So I moved to an organization here as manager of manufacturing engineering, an organization called Fabrication. It's a division within the Boeing company. Fabrication is kind of like a company within within the company, right? Like it has thousands of people. At that time, there were 18,000 people in fabrication, and I was the manager of engineering, process engineering, manufacturing engineering planning, and also what we call a moonshine shop, which is a prototyping shop in the factory. And I actually served in that role for 2 years, which actually for a year and a half, and I'll explain why. For a year and a half, and I truly enjoy it. It's been one of my favorite jobs throughout my career. We served a plant that produced 4,000 to 5,000 parts per day. Anything that you change in that production system, like could be a wrench that would stop everything. So you had to be very careful, and at the same time, really work on advancement. So robotics, automation, and just lean manufacturing in general, right? So that job actually gave me a lot of great foundation for what I know today of what works and what doesn't work in manufacturing, which was great. I learned tremendously from my process engineers and the manufacturing engineering planners. They were brilliant people. They are brilliant people. And so actually before, I must say, before I became director, I was offered the opportunity to go abroad. So I actually worked at the Boeing Research and Technology Organization in Australia, working with them on strategy. As I explained to you before, I actually worked on intellectual property, competitive assessment, and so on. So I had, some skills that I could use. And I was invited to go to Australia to help the team with IP planning, intellectual property planning, skills development, and just in general, the strategy of like how they do collaborations with universities. And so I spent 7 months in Australia doing that role. And one of the reasons I must say that why we selected Australia, why we wanted to go to Australia was because my wife was also looking for places to go on sabbatical. And so we wanted to align both. So she was invited first to the University of Melbourne to serve there as a researcher on sabbatical. And at the same time, I worked at the Boeing Research and Technology office in Melbourne, Australia. And this is when I was called to basically interview for what would be my first executive job, which was as director of Chemtech, Chemical Technologies, Metals and Ceramics. It was a surprise for me that they would call me actually for that interview. Typically, those interviews, they're slated. You don't really apply to them. You're called to basically interview. So they had been, as it turns out, they had been checking my performance over the years, right? And I had a lot of connections throughout the company based on the work that I did in research and manufacturing. So I was invited to interview. I actually created a strategy for that interview. So you know how, like, if you start a job, people say, well, when you start a job, you can start a 30, 60, 90 transition plan to do that job, right? To like help you through the first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Well, I do that prior to the interview, right? So the idea is that then when the interview comes, I come ready for, like, if you hire me, this is what I'm going to be doing, right? And that type of preparation actually changes the mindset of the interviewer to really imagine you in the role. And while doing so, I also share with them a strategy deck that, of like, basically that covered everything from purpose to the people and the skills. So it went from why, how, what, who. So, why is like the alignment of research and technology development to the programs that you're serving. The how is the leveraging of the tools that you have and the new tools that will be coming into play, of tools that you use to manage your work, like, for example, IP plans or technology roadmaps. The what was the actual development and focus of the technologies that we were going to be investing on. So it's like, the development of all of those technology roadmaps, the content of the technology roadmaps, and the who, which cover basically the skills. And so throughout my career, what I have observed is that this merge of like a technology roadmap and a skills roadmap, the people roadmap, actually, like if you're able to do that, you're able to manage in ways that it's just going to propel the team, right? And so a productive team is a happy team, and a happy team is a productive team, right? So I worked as director of Chemtech Metals and Ceramics, basically doing work that, oops, I keep on pressing, doing work that was on research, basically on everything that is in chemical technologies, which includes, paints, coatings, surface technology, surface treatment, also things like sealants, lubricants, and how these materials are used in aerospace, right? In the aerospace products. Then metals, of course, is all of the metal alloys, standards, testing, innovation, additive manufacturing of metal alloys, and then ceramics, typically called also, more generally speaking, stream environments. So materials that are used for stream environments like space applications. So I did that role for 2 years prior to moving to Blue Origin, where I was, let me hide this. Ooh, wait, I think I stopped it. There you go. Can you guys see my screen? Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So in 2017, at the beginning of 2017, I moved to Blue Origin to work as Director of Materials and Processes. I wanted a career change at the time, and I was looking into maybe companies that could better align with my pace of work, with my values, and so on. I found Blue Origin, found it was exciting, and they just happened to be actually establishing the materials and processes team. They had hired more than 40 people. They needed a leader. They offered me the role. I started as a product group leader, which was the title at the time, and then that title changed. We retitled the whole company, and then that title changed to Director of Materials and Processes. In that role, which was pretty exciting, we worked on 2 novel super alloys. The team was formulating it. I structured the project and so that it could start, going into a rhythm of delivery, right? And like qualification and testing and application and creation of parts and so on. And there were also extreme environment type materials that are typically composite type materials that you use for high or low temperatures that we were formulating to, and that were also going through qualification. And then critical type processes like laser welding and laser cladding that we were basically qualifying for. And there's a picture there in the presentation for BE4, which is one of the engines that is a proprietary engine from Blue Origin. It's the engine that 7 of those engines will be used to propel basically New Glenn. It's also the engine selected by ULA for their rocket. So I worked as Director of Materials and Processes, and in 2019, I took a role of Director of Crew Capsule, which later became Director of Mechanical Engineering for the New Shepard program. And so, it wasn't that transition from MMP to Crew Capsule was not planned. I knew that I wanted to go to program management. As a skill and in leadership, you gotta go through, you will see that if you're working in a company, you might be leading a product, or you might be leading a function, or you might be leading both. But so basically materials and process is more of a function that provides a service to the whole company. A Director of Crew Capsule, you're the leader for that product, right? And so I knew I needed to move into program management. And this was a way to do this. it just happened that the opportunity came up. The previous director stepped down, and the position was open, and I was asked to apply if I was interested, and so I did. And after a very tough interview, I actually got the role, and it was a very exciting role, both positive and negative, because of the level of stress, right? So in 2019, I spent basically the whole 2019 working on the qualification and verification of components, subsystems, and systems. Well, qualification and and verification of components and subsystems of the system, which is the crew capsule, right? And this is in alignment with first human flight. So the stakes were pretty high, right? And so as a result, it's a job that you want to do for a certain amount of time. And then for health reasons, then you probably want to, get more diversity in your resume after that. But the point is that I really enjoyed working as the crew capsule leader. And something happened, there were several personal things that happened at the end of 2019, and also some things in the media. So at that time, the Boeing company was actually undergoing a lot of scrutiny by the FAA with as a result of the events of the 737 MAX. I saw Dennis Muhlenberg, basically talking in hearings with Congress, and I listened to him while I was actually driving to work one morning, and that inspired me to start thinking about what I was doing with my life, actually, and thinking about, okay, so I was working, I was having a lot of fun working, on rockets and so on, and while these, space technology is very interesting. Go back to my mission, right? My mission is to serve as many people as possible. And serving as many people as possible at that time, when I was listening to Dennis Muhlenberg on NPR, I started thinking like, wow, I mean, there's a lot more going on, and there are things that are happening that I can help with, potentially, right? And maybe my legacy is not so much like, did I work on exciting, new products and so on, but, how much did I do so that I can serve as many people as possible? In this case, through mass transportation. So this idea just started to grow in me, right? So this itch to go back to Boeing started to grow in me. And so at the end of 2019 and into the beginning of 2020, I started my conversations to go back and come back to the Boeing company. And so today, I actually serve as Director of Engineering for Design Practices back at Boeing. So, what I do today is we're trying to basically build a body of knowledge that contains what will become basically requirements within different programs. But it's much more than that. It's information that centralizes what an engineer needs to do their work. Information that also can be leveraged and dissected in different ways so that products around the company can understand better their requirements and therefore their risk posture. And it's information that is needed in order to basically dynamically refresh your baseline of requirements in a program. I had no idea I would have this much fun working on requirements. When I thought before of like, systems engineering and requirements, I didn't really think it was this fun. And but when I was offered the role to work on this, I saw the clear connection to serving as many people as possible and to actually helping a company and an industry as a whole, right? So I don't take it lightly, right? My working team knows, I'm like joking all the time, and and so on. Tiffany, who's here listening, knows that. But I take my job seriously in the sense of I know that I have had to work really hard from coming to from coming from the mountainous region of Puerto Rico to be where I am today. I've had to work really hard, and as a result, I'm not going to waste my time, right? And so as a result, so I have a very passionate way of thinking of what I do and the benefit that it has to society in general. And if I don't see that connection, then I'm probably not going to do that job, right? I'm probably going to find something else that will fulfill that need for me to serve as many people as possible. So this is, my life. I you can see here in the picture my wife, our two girls. This is a picture that we took from one of our vacations in Puerto Rico. We love to travel, so I added a picture from Machu Picchu there. And I love to make stuff. So, I balance my life with exercise, and I balance my life with running too. So basically running and exercise, right? I read and listen to podcasts and so on a lot, but I also make stuff, right? So I'm a manager now, so a lot of the things that I do are very computational too and administrative in nature. And so I love to also sort of cultivate or continue to cultivate that side of me, like the partitions, of my brain that is creative and that likes to formulate and so on. So I've actually taken on to make wine. I'm on my 7th batch right now, and my batch today is a Cabernet Sauvignon that is actually from grapes from Washington from this season. So we'll see. I'm super excited about it. And I also make like things like soap and shampoo and lotions. And the woman that you see here, and this is important to me because it's I think that, and especially in the community where we are, right, a Latino community, we're very family oriented. We really, that's our core, right? That's a part of our core and who we are. And so who you see here is actually my mom. That's the original Marvi. She's, a rock in our life, right? In the life of the family. A self-made woman who has had like her clinical lab for 40 years in my town, and a very, powerful and also empowering woman in my life. So yeah, that's the reason why she's there. Questions, comments, venting moments, whatever you want to share.
Sure, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask the first question. I thought it was a great presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your career path and your trajectory, like starting from graduate school and like just early, education all the way through to where you currently are. So I was actually interested in, you kind of briefly touched on how sorry, I'm drawing the blank, but essentially what I want to ask is, it's clear that outreach is very important to you. And I was wondering, as someone who works in industry, are a lot of the like outreach things that you're involved with, are they more things that you seek out yourself, or are they things that you're involved with through the company? Is it more, would you say, like external outreach or internal outreach, or a combination of both? Like, what does that really look like, for people who are interested in continuing outreach after they're finished?
So both, and in the benefit of working for a big company is that there's a lot of opportunity to actually do this via both paths. If you have a good pitch, you're probably gonna get, you know what I mean? Like you can get funding if you have a good pitch. So I'll give you an example. I was asked in 2011, 2012 to go to recruit at the University of Puerto Rico. So the Boeing company, just the same, a lot of other companies, we go recruiting, to different universities. We probably go to Georgia Tech, right? So we go to the University of Puerto Rico every year. And what I said was like, yeah, I would love to help. That's awesome. Thank you for inviting me. And I want to also take 2 days to do outreach back in the mountainous region, to go to multiple schools and, do this project on the side. So from the recruitment team, I basically ask people like, okay, so who wants to go in an adventure? Because I'm talking about like, you're not really staying in very nice places, right? And so, in fact, like the engineers came with me to those outreach activities. They stayed in an hacienda type. It's not really a motel. It's more of a like very low key place, bed and breakfast type place, right, where you stay. And we didn't even have like hot water, right? And it gets cold in the mountains, right? So I I just want, I mean, these are people that are as passionate, in our region. You can find them, and so you find them, you like, get your club, get your group, and then you start inventing things. So we did that in my hometown, and then we the next year after that, or 2 years after that, we went to multiple towns. And then the next year after that, we went to other schools, other types of schools. And so I did those trips, sponsored basically by Boeing. They would give me like, um, a lot of stuff, like, different toys for the kids and stickers and like all sorts of things, right? And because I know that from the ages of like 10 to 14, this is when we lose a lot of women in STEM fields. I would also target not just the high schools, but I would actually target middle schools, right? And go, to different middle schools. And, the beauty of it is that, it's just time that is so precious, right? Like both for the people, it's not just for the people that are listening to you, it's for you and your health. Like seriously, like I felt like a much healthier person and happier person after those engagements. So the other thing, so that's from the side of like what things you can invent and sort of like convince people to sponsor you. On the other side, there's a lot of affiliations and societies and things that the company, actually sponsor. So as a result, I'm called to like, give talks, to CHIP. For example, I was actually in CHIP, this year, like 3 times, to like basically 2 different talks to smaller communities, and then actually at the CHIP conference too. And then from the side of LGBTQ community, right? That's another, venue where I can contribute. So I was asked, because I'm so open about my family, right? I was asked to become the executive sponsor for OSTEM. And so last week I was actually, interviewing people online, which is really weird, but online interviewing people, right, at OSTEM, and welcome students. You know, those are sponsor activities. So there's just so much, right? Engineering week comes and there's, like, I mean, you throw a dart and you find a project to do, right? Like you just hit someone that is doing something, right? Either going to local schools, or whatever. Tomorrow, I'm gonna be presenting at, it's gonna be like 6 a.m. Here at time here, um, for a school in Florida where a friend of mine is the teacher, right? So that's the other thing too. I have a lot of friends that are teachers. And so they just invite me to places, and I'm at, to present via web. And I can't say no, I just can't, right? So yeah, I'm involved for sure. And you can be involved. Just pursue it, find the programs, find the groups, or if not, then find the people so that then you can put a pitch together and convince whoever needs to give you some, funding. Sometimes you don't need a lot.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I know, at least like as a graduate student, you don't hear so much about how exactly it's going to work when you want to do outreach later, like as someone in an industry position, and it seems like you would have had you have a great perspective, especially since you value like serving people kind of in all aspects. So that's why I wanted to hear what you have to say about that. So it looks like we have a couple questions in the chat. So the first one is, it says, more personal question. How did you handle moving to many places and switching jobs with a family?
I would say that so the way I guess that the most important, can you guys hear me well? Is it okay? Audio?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So the most important thing actually is not with just your career and you as an individual, is that you have to operate and work as a team. So I tell people the most important decision that you make sometimes is not what career path you're going to follow. Like, you can be successful in many different ways, right? But who are you with? Right? Like, that is a very good decision that people just like, oh, follow your heart. Yeah, you got to follow your heart, but be smart about it, right? Seriously, like, you can be with, I'm telling you this because as a Latina woman, I've seen many, many friends and peers, right, that have had tougher lives because they had tougher partners to deal with, right? So they were not people that were necessarily super encouraging, or they couldn't move away for graduate school, or they couldn't, take this job that was a stretch and a challenge. So I guess that, the way in which, sorry, that noise is some roof noise. We're actually solarizing the house.
Cool.
Yeah, we're very happy about it. So anyway, the point is that how do I manage it? It's not how I manage it, it's how we manage it as a family. I know that there will be times, and I've had to learn this, right? That there will be times when Lilo has to travel internationally, when she goes conferences and so on. And so there's a give and take there. And sometimes we've had to make decisions for one person to be more favored because that's the best decision for the team. That was the case when we moved to Seattle, right? Like, she was the one that was recruited at the University of Washington, and to find a professor job is something really hard, right? And so I said, okay, so I want to work in industry, so I can make it work, right? But then when I had the opportunity to then become a director, we were in sabbatical. I mean, she was in sabbatical. I've never had sabbatical, right? But she was in sabbatical in Australia, and she had to move with me back to here to Seattle so that I can start my new role. So it is a matter of consideration, respect, understanding that everybody has and really needs to fulfill needs of personal growth, and it's understanding and respecting, right? We love each other, right? I mean, to like to the end of the universe and back, right? And yet that's not everything, right? Because there has to be respect and consideration, and that also that like partner to partner admiration too, of like, your work is important to me because it's important to you, it makes you happy, right? And I want you to be happy. So you know I guess that's the way I manage it. I know it's kind of soft, right? But it is important to have that those discussions first, because then you can plan. Then you can say like, okay, logistics, right? We're moving the girls, and then we are, who do we leave the house with? And like, the girls need to be in school, right? Which schools do they go to? Everything else just fall into place, and it's more of planning logistics. The important questions happen first, like, how much am I considering my partner and my wife when I make a decision?
Sorry, I'm on mute.
That's okay.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on, what it's like to have a family just while you're working. There's so many different challenges that I think, while you're still a student, you don't consider because you're just not there yet, but it's valuable to get insight from those who have been there.
Yeah,
So we have
it's totally possible. The only thing that I complain about is that daycare is way too expensive, right?
a
Way too expensive. It's absolutely ridiculous, right? But
sure.
for the most part, everything is possible, and you can plan, you can strategize, and you can do a lot of things, and you don't have to compromise. You don't have to compromise overall, right? But you will have to compromise at a local level, right? Like in some points, there will be one person that will be favored, one career that will be favored, and so it's just a matter of like, how do you balance that so that both people benefit? How do you balance that so that your children are not traumatized by the moves and stuff, right?
Right, right, very true. So it looks like we have another question in the chat. It says, you have been able to work in many different fields as well as specialties. How did you market yourself during interviews as a person who, even though has a background in stem cells and thin films, could work in strained materials, ceramics, metals, etc.?
Well, I didn't jump from one thing to another automatically, right? So you build those skills along the way. Prior to moving into, say, director of Chemtech Metals and Ceramics, I was a formulator of materials in Chemtech. I am a chemical engineer at the end, right? And I do have a robust background on like polymerization and materials that are used for all sorts of purposes, all sorts of applications. Now, one of the things that I mentioned in my during my talk was that you have to try to get your interviewer to think of you and imagine you in the new role. And that's a tricky thing to do. Most interviews actually focus on the background, on like your experience, and it's all backwards. It's all in the past, right? You got to get them to imagine you in that role. And the way you do that is, or a way to do that is by, turning every question that you get, you answer it with an experience, and this is what happened in the situation, and this is how I solved the problem, and oh, this is how I see it, that it is related to this job, and how I would solve these problems moving forward, and what I would do in this particular case, and so on. In order to make those connections, you have to understand really well what the job description says, right? So you have to understand the still from that job description, what skills they're looking for, and what is the profile of the person or characterization of the technical person that they're looking for. Then you have to also level your responses to the level of that job. So when I was basically interviewing as a director, the basic difference that I could find, right, between what is a manager and a director is that managers tend to do a lot of the administrative part, right? While directors envision the future, they work on strategy, they actually set the path, right? That then managers have to live with, right? And so then what could I do within that interview so that they could see me as a strategist? That was my goal. And this is why I created this a strategy deck that basically went through the different functions, right? So over prepare for that interview. And then the final thing is that so Google 30, 60, 90 transition plan. And every time you interview, go prepared with your 30, 60, 90 transition plan, which it's like, what would you do the first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? And I structured that like in detail. This is, the things that I need to learn from the new role. These are the things that I will be analyzing. Then these are the things that I will start changing, with the information that I'm collecting the first 30 days, right? So that is, it just sets the conversation in a different tone, and they actually start imagining you.
Thank you. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. So it looks like, we have a minute or two left. I don't know how strict you are on time, or is it all right if we ask one more question?
One more question is okay.
Okay. So you briefly mentioned that for a time you were an independent consultant, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Like, how did that work? How did you get started? Like,
So it's funny. I'll tell you exactly how I got that job. Let me excuse myself with my next meeting really quickly. I want to answer that though, wait, because it's kind of a funky story.
okay.
Um, either in five. Okay, so when I was a lecturer at the University of Washington, I told you guys that I was severely underemployed, right? In terms of compensation and also just in general. I mean, I wanted to go back to research. I wanted to do more. Um, and so at that time also because of the economy situation, right? Like the economy had collapsed, the stock market collapsed, the school was actually getting a lot of cuts from the Washington state. And so at the state level, they were, cutting a lot of funding. So lecturers are not tenure track positions. Lecturers are in the operational budget, typically of a department or of the College of Engineering. And so what that means is that at any given point, they can just cut you off, right? And you're out, you're unemployed. So I had this like paranoia, right, that I would lose my job at the time when I just got a job, and it was really hard to get a job, right? So the stress led me to every time I'm stressed, I'm typically a very happy person, and so I don't know how to project my stress or get it out other than with exercise, and so I accumulated in my back. So I ended up going to the chiropractor. And I'm telling this to see the story. So I'm telling this to the chiropractor. And I say, like, this is happening. I can't believe this is happening. At any given time, I'm just like gonna be out, without a job after all of these things. And this is what's gotten me stressed. And so she says to me, my husband works for this company and they hire contractors that are consultants. It's typically around intellectual property, inventions, and things like that. Do you want me to give your resume to him? I'm like, yeah. so so I gave my resume to my chiropractor who gave it to her husband, basically. And that was the connection. It was just personal. You never know really how you're going to get these very important network nodes, right? So never assume, right, that you're in a situation where you can just be completely on leash, because he can bite you back. But also like just be yourself, be genuine, and be honest. And there's a lot of times there are people out there that will go off out of their way to help you. And in this case, it was my chiropractor. She passed my resume, no strings attached. Like she just passed it. And next thing I know, I'm meeting with her husband in a coffee shop, and he's offering me, like I'm gonna say the tag so that you guys know how much consultants make too. You know, next thing I know, he was like, "Yeah, our standard, it is like $175 per hour. Is that okay for you?" And of course, I'm like, I'm just like laughing, right? Like, are you kidding me? Um, and so he hired me for projects that actually develop a new set of skills too. So I started by working on reports that were they're called requests for inventions, which were like understanding a field, exploring. I'm talking about hundreds of patents and hundreds of articles, and then distilling from that information what areas or in which areas you have to invent in order to like push that field forward, which means that in those areas the IP will be very valuable. And so I learned how to do that. I learned then with them how to do competitive assessments, right? So your scientific skills, that you develop as a graduate student, which is to do basically a literature review, right? And you can exploit that to do a lot of different things. And in this case, it was an IP consultant. That's how I got it.
Very, very cool and unexpected. Thank you so much for sharing.
Random.
Why? Very. Okay, well, we know that it seems that you probably have a meeting, but I just wanted to thank you again for coming, for sharing your story. I know the audience must have enjoyed it as much as I did, and yeah, thank you again so much. We really enjoyed having you.
You're welcome. It's an honor to, be presenting to Georgia Tech students. I myself thought about going to Georgia Tech actually for graduate school. I was invited. We were between Georgia Tech and Carnegie Mellon. So it's a great school, and it's an honor for me to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And take care.
You too. Bye.